In the bitter winter of 1876, a black mail-order bride stepped off a train in Colorado, hoping for a new beginning, only to be humiliated and left alone in a town that didn't want her. But just when survival seemed impossible, a wounded doctor with scars of his own offered her shelter. What began as an act of reluctant mercy would become something far more powerful, a partnership forged through fire, loss, and defiance. What happens when the world turns its back on you, and you choose to stay anyway? The wind howled as the stagecoach rattled into Pine Hollow, Wyoming, its wheels groaning under the weight of half-frozen mud and hard dreams. Inside sat Naomi Ellington, spine straight despite the cold, gloved hands wrapped around a small leather satchel that held the last of her belongings and the last of her hope. 6 months of correspondence, 6 months of carefully chosen words, shared thoughts, dreams, promises. "Dear Mr. Harper," she'd written, "I can cook, sew, and read fluently in both Latin and English. I've taught in 2 schools in Louisiana. Though I'm of African descent, I assure you I am a Christian woman of strong character, and I seek only a quiet life with a kind man." He had responded with warmth, acceptance, understanding. "Color don't matter none to me," he'd claimed. "A good woman is hard to find out here." She'd clung to those words until the stagecoach doors creaked open and the truth of the West stepped in. A tall man in a clean tan duster and black hat stood waiting at the stop, a bouquet of prairie flowers in one hand. His eyes searched the coach with a quiet kind of nervous anticipation until he saw her. Naomi stepped down slowly, her boots crunching on frozen earth, her face lit with tentative warmth. "Mr. Harper?" His face changed like thunder rolling across plains. "You're her?" "Yes," she said, the word barely audible. The flowers hit the ground like snow. "God almighty, I didn't know you were colored." A silence swept over the small crowd gathered near the general store. Even the wind seemed to hush. Naomi stood her ground. "You received my letters. I told you plainly." "You should have said it louder." He laughed, cruel and sharp. "I can't bring you home. You'd be dead by morning. Or I would. This ain't New Orleans. You don't belong here." He turned his back and walked away. No one moved to stop him. No one moved to help her. Naomi didn't flinch. She simply picked up her satchel, straightened her coat, and walked toward the boarding house. The landlady stopped her at the steps. "We're full," she said. "I'll pay—" "Not for your kind." The saloon offered no better. The church was locked. The sheriff turned his face away. By nightfall, Naomi found herself in the livery stable, curled against a pile of old hay, her coat wrapped around her like a dying prayer. Her hands shook from cold, but her pride refused to let her cry. This was not the first door slammed in her face, not the first promise broken, but this one hurt worse, because she'd dared to hope. The sun had barely crept over the ridge when the stable door creaked open. A man stood silhouetted in the light, tall, broad-shouldered, moving stiffly on a crooked leg. His gray overcoat was patched at the elbows, his black hair streaked with silver, and a long scar split the left side of his jaw. He looked like someone who'd lost something important and never found it again. "You the one Harper rejected?" he asked, voice hoarse. Naomi slowly stood, dusting straw from her coat. "My name is Naomi Ellington." He nodded once. "Silas Reed. I'm a doctor." She waited. "I got a clinic a half-mile out. Needs cleaning. Room in back's empty." "That's your way of offering me shelter?" "That's my way of offering work," he said flatly. "Don't confuse the two." Naomi's chin lifted. "I'll earn my keep." They walked together in silence through the frost-bitten town. People stared, whispers curling through the air like smoke. Some crossed the street, others laughed. He ignored them all. The clinic was a squat building at the edge of a field, weather-beaten but sturdy. The windows were clouded. The porch sagged. Inside, the air smelled of camphor, blood, and something faintly floral, like memory. "Room's back there," Silas said, nodding down a hall. "There's bread in the cupboard, soup on the stove." "Don't steal my morphine." She blinked. "I don't take what isn't mine." "Didn't say you did. Just covers the bases." He limped toward a back room, pulling off his coat. She saw the stiffness in his gait, the scar that wrapped around his wrist, the way he favored his right side like it carried all his pain. When the door shut behind him, Naomi let herself breathe. The small room he'd pointed to was bare but clean. A narrow bed, a cracked mirror, a table with a Bible missing half its cover. It was more than she had yesterday. She warmed her hands by the stove, spooned a little soup into a bowl, and whispered a quiet thank you. Not to Silas, but to whatever force had kept her alive another day. Then she got to work. The next morning, Naomi woke early. Not from a sense of duty, but from habit, shaped by years of doing more than expected, just to be seen as enough. She was already in the main room of the clinic, sleeves rolled up, when Silas Reed limped out of his back quarters with a cup of black coffee and a grunt. He paused in the doorway. The floors had been scrubbed, shelves reorganized, tools arranged with a precision he hadn't seen since before the war. "You always clean this early?" he asked. "I wasn't hired to sleep in." He took a long sip from his cup, eyes scanning the room with a kind of suspicion that had nothing to do with the cleaning. "You touched the surgical saw?" "No," she replied. "But I fixed the splint rack. One was loose." He limped toward his ledger, grunted at the ink stains on a patient list, and dropped into his chair. The silence stretched. Naomi moved past him, brushing his elbow lightly with the hem of her skirt as she reached for the medicine cabinet. "Miss Ellington." "Yes?" "I don't like small talk." She turned to him, unbothered. "Neither do I." He stared at her a moment, then nodded once. It was the closest thing to a truce they would ever say aloud. In the days that followed, Naomi carved out space, not just in the clinic, but in Silas's routines. She learned how he liked his instruments arranged, the way he used willow bark tea instead of whiskey to ease pain, and how he kept a small tin of peppermint tucked under the counter, presumably for children, though she'd never seen him offer one. Patients came slowly. The town still didn't trust him, but they needed him. One woman arrived with a festering burn, another with a child coughing blood. Naomi stood beside Silas during both procedures, handing tools, cleaning wounds, translating pain into words when the patients were too afraid to speak. Silas never praised her, but after the child was tucked into the cot and the mother sent home with cough syrup and instructions, he turned to her with a grunt. "Good instincts." "Thank you, Dr. Reed." "Don't call me that," he muttered. "What should I call you?" He hesitated. "Silas, but only in private." She nodded. "And you may call me Naomi, in private." The air between them shifted slightly, not warmer, but less brittle. Silas didn't talk about his past, but it hung around him like a scent, in the way he winced when someone coughed too hard, the way he paused before touching a patient's skin, the way he slept, with his boots near the bed and his hand close to his revolver. One night after a particularly bad case, a trapper with a shattered arm and blood loss so severe Naomi had to hold the man's shoulder as Silas stitched and muttered to himself like a man chasing ghosts. Naomi stayed awake in the corner of the room, watching the fire die down. "You were a war surgeon," she said softly. He didn't look up from where he sat, rubbing his stiff leg. "Gettysburg," he said after a long moment. "Then Andersonville. They assigned me to the prisoners." She waited. "Got caught in a fire at the field tent. Tried to pull out a boy no older than your brother might have been. Fire didn't care." Naomi didn't move. "I still smell it sometimes," he whispered. "I still hear the woman who screamed at me for teaching her son grammar," Naomi said, her voice barely audible. "She said it was unnatural, that colored girls should keep their eyes low and their words simpler." Silas looked up. "I told her, ignorance is a choice. I won't teach it." He laughed, just once. A dry, sharp exhale. "Bet she didn't like that. She spit at me." He shook his head slowly, then looked at her with something new behind his eyes. Not pity, not admiration either. Something quieter. Recognition. They sat in silence after that, and somehow the silence said everything. Winter thickened. Snow drifted knee-deep outside the clinic, and the stove had to be fed hourly to keep the chill at bay. Supplies ran low. Patients increased. A fever swept through the lower flats near the creek, and Naomi worked round the clock, brewing elderberry tonic, keeping water clean, and comforting mothers whose children shook with chills. Silas's limp worsened, but he never stopped. Naomi began helping him dress the deeper wounds, binding twisted joints, watching his techniques with surgical interest. "You should have been a doctor," he muttered one day after she tied off a suture with perfect tension. "I still could be," she replied. His brow rose. "If the world had room for women like me," she added. Silas was quiet a long moment. "It should." That night he left a medical textbook on her bed. No note, no comment, just a gesture. She studied every page until dawn. The first sign of change came in the form of a knock on the door one icy morning. A man from the saloon stood there, hat in hand, shifting his weight. "My wife." "She's hurting," he muttered. "Says she'd rather see the lady than the doc." Naomi glanced at Silas. He gave a small nod. "You better go," he said. "She'll listen to you." Naomi wiped her hands, pulled on her shawl, and stepped into the snow. When she returned hours later, cheeks flushed from cold and success, Silas didn't ask what had happened. He only said, "Next time, take the peppermint tin." "You earned it." She smiled and took two. The first note appeared under the clinic door sometime after midnight. Folded once, no name, no signature. Just 5 words written in bold, slanted script. "She don't belong here. Leave." Naomi found it at sunrise after stoking the fire and setting water to boil. She read it once, twice, then folded it calmly and dropped it into the stove. The flames flared briefly, devouring the threat. When Silas entered, she didn't mention it, but he noticed the tight set of her shoulders, the way she scrubbed the counter twice when once would do, the way her jaw clenched with each scrape of her brush. Later, as they wrapped a miner's sprained wrist, Silas spoke quietly. "They'll never accept you, Naomi." Her hands didn't pause. "They barely accept me." "I'm not asking them to accept me," she said. "I'm asking them to accept the care I give." He stared at her a long moment. "Some won't separate the two." "Then we don't separate ourselves," she replied. "We keep going." She tied off the bandage and smiled at the child they treated. "There you go, sweetheart. Don't climb trees till spring." By the end of January, the whispers turned to sneers. Silas noticed patients hesitating at the threshold. Naomi noticed groceries arriving with bruised fruit. She heard it in the way women spoke to her with narrowed eyes, in the way men looked too long, too hard, and spat just after she passed. One woman refused treatment altogether when Naomi opened the clinic door. "You touch me, I'll rot worse than I already am." Naomi didn't flinch. "Then you can go on rotting." She closed the door behind her. That night, Silas didn't ask what happened. He simply pushed an extra slice of bread onto her plate at dinner and poured the coffee a little fuller. It wasn't until the church sermon that the poison truly spread. Pastor Ira Gibbons, Pine Hollow's self-appointed moral compass, stood before his congregation with fire in his voice. "There is a place for charity," he proclaimed, "but there is also a place for order. God did not intend for his flock to be misled by false prophets or dark temptations. A woman living alone with a man, a woman of her color." Naomi wasn't there to hear it. She was tending to a young girl with scarlet fever. But by evening, 3 different people had repeated the gist. Silas said nothing, just poured another log on the fire. But later she found his hands shaking as he stitched a tear in his coat. Not from cold, from rage held too long. She knelt in front of him. "Let them talk. It's more than talk." "I know." She placed her hand on his chest, right over the place his heart used to hurt, maybe still did. "Then let them talk louder," she whispered. "We'll live louder." 2 days later, a deputy from the sheriff's office arrived with a thinly veiled warning. "You two aren't breaking any laws," he said, removing his hat. "But folks are uneasy. Reckon the town council might hold a meeting. Just so you know." Naomi looked at Silas. He was already nodding. "Let them meet." The deputy left uneasy. That evening, Silas leaned against the doorway of her room while she sat reading a medical anatomy chart by lamplight. "Still got that bag packed?" She looked up slowly. "The one from the stagecoach?" He nodded once. "I unpacked it the day after you gave me a key to the cabinet." His throat bobbed. "Why?" She smiled faintly. "Because if I'm learning to heal, I can't do it halfway. You can't clean wounds with one foot out the door." He came closer, his limp heavier from a day full of tending, frost-bitten fingers, and a broken jaw from a bar fight. You could have left, he said. I still could, she corrected, but I haven't. Silas looked down. I keep waiting for you to hate me for dragging you into this. Naomi rose and stepped close. You didn't drag me. I walked in. Her fingers brushed his wrist, barely a touch, but enough to pause the world for a breath. I stayed because I saw a man worth standing beside. He swallowed hard but didn't move. I'm not leaving, Silas. He didn't say anything. But when he turned, he left her door open behind him. And in Pine Hollow, that was louder than a love letter. The town meeting was called on a Friday night. Words spread like wildfire. The church hall filled with cold bodies and hot tempers. Silas and Naomi arrived together, coats buttoned to the neck, standing side by side at the back of the room. Pastor Gibbons stood at the pulpit. It is not hatred that guides us, but decency, he said, his voice syrupy. What message do we send our children when an unmarried man and woman live together? And a woman of her kind? Someone in the front muttered, it's not just indecent, it's dangerous. Another stood. That clinic's been a blessing. They helped my sister. Someone else. She saved my baby from fever. But then Miller's voice rang out. Thomas Miller, the rancher who'd rejected Naomi months ago. It's a matter of principle, he barked. You let this go, what's next? Sharing pews? Marriages? The room tensed. Naomi stepped forward. Her voice was calm, precise. I am not here to threaten your children. I am not here to tempt your husbands. I came because I was promised decency. I stayed because this town needed a healer. She looked toward Gibbons. I've held your people's hands as they died. I've boiled your linens and buried your stillborns. I've cleaned your filth and poured your tonics. She turned to face the crowd. I won't beg for your kindness. I'll settle for your tolerance. If that's too much, then say it plainly. Silence. Then the blacksmith rose. My son was saved by her hands, he said. And if that's what indecency looks like, then God forgive me. I'll take more of it. A few more stood. A few did not. But the tide had turned. And Naomi, standing at Silas's side, knew something had changed. They still weren't welcome. But now they were not alone. The air was brittle with cold when the fire came. It started as a flicker in the clinic's front curtains, just enough to paint the glass orange in the moonlight. Naomi was the first to smell it. She shot upright in her narrow bed, the scent of burning fabric slicing through her sleep like a blade. Silas! She yelled, already pulling on her coat. He was in the hallway a moment later, limping fast, half-dressed, eyes wild. The fire had already found the floorboards. Bucket line, he rasped. Wake the neighbors. Go! But Naomi didn't run. She shoved open the front door and screamed into the night, Fire! The clinic! We need help! Then she turned and did what she'd done for over a year. She stayed. She and Silas fought the blaze with a rhythm born of long nights and unspoken trust. She passed water to his good arm. He kicked in a back window for ventilation. She shielded the medicine cabinet with her body, coughing through smoke to rescue their dwindling supply of laudanum and quinine. Neighbors came running. The blacksmith, the widow who'd once thrown scraps toward Naomi's feet, but now trusted her with her children's coughs. One by one, they formed a chain. Buckets flew hand to hand, water slapped the flames, and the fire began to wheeze its dying breath. By dawn, the clinic was scorched, but standing. Smoke-stained walls, charred counter, the exam room half destroyed. Naomi's hands were blistered. Silas's limp was worse, but neither of them said a word, until he found the scrap of paper wedged under the door frame. Another note. This one wasn't anonymous. Leave, or next time, we light it with you inside. TM. Silas's jaw tightened. Naomi's hand shook only once, then stilled. She folded the note, placed it on the desk, and sat down. We rebuild. Silas looked at her like he might break. Naomi? No, she said sharply. Not again. Not one more town. Not one more train ride away from purpose. Silas ran a hand through his soot-streaked hair. This man, Miller, he doesn't stop. Then neither do we. And that was that. The marshal arrested Thomas Miller 2 days later. Arson, threatening behavior, attempted murder. He protested, claimed it was just a warning, claimed his horse had gone missing, claimed Naomi forged the note herself for sympathy. But the marshal didn't buy it this time. Too many witnesses. Too many people had seen Naomi drag a fevered child through a snowstorm or deliver twins in the middle of a lightning strike. And more than that, too many had started to hope. Because if Naomi Ellington, the colored woman from back east, could stand tall in the face of hate and fire and still stitch wounds with steady hands, then maybe, just maybe, this town could be more than it had been. A week after the fire, a letter arrived. Silas handed it to her over breakfast, still wrapped in its creased envelope. Naomi read it slowly, lips parting as she reached the second paragraph. "It's from the medical college," she whispered. Silas set down his coffee. "The one you wrote to for me?" He nodded once. "They're offering me a place. Chicago. Spring semester. Full tuition waived on merit." She looked up, stunned. Silas didn't smile. Instead, he said, "You should go." Naomi's breath caught. "What?" "You said it yourself. If the world had room for women like you—" "I said if," she interrupted. "You've already proven you can do it. Now they want to give you the degree to match. You could be the first black female physician in the territory. Hell, maybe the country." "But what about here?" she asked. "The patients? The repairs?" "You?" Silas shrugged. "The town knows what to do now. They've got your protocols written out. And I'll hold the place until you come back." Naomi went silent. "You want me to come back?" His voice was quieter now. "I don't ask people to stay, Naomi, but I want you to." The words hung between them, more intimate than any touch. She reached across the table and took his calloused hand in hers. "I'll go," she said, "and I'll come back." Silas swallowed, eyes suddenly bright. "Good." The town threw a small gathering to send her off. The blacksmith carved her a travel cane, just in case the snow gets rough. The school teacher gave her a journal with a stitched cover. The pastor, to everyone's surprise, offered a quiet apology. Naomi accepted it, graciously, without bitterness, but with eyes that saw too clearly to forget. And Silas? He gave her a train ticket, folded, already paid. And in the pocket of her coat, he slipped a note. "There are people out there who need you. Go show them who you are." She boarded the train at dawn, snow falling soft around her boots. And when she looked back, Silas was still there, standing beside the tracks, coat collar up, holding the peppermint tin in one hand. He didn't wave. He just watched her leave, his heart tucked carefully inside a chest that had learned how to hope again. The train hissed into Pine Hollow with a shriek of brakes and a cloud of coal smoke. Passengers leaned out, peering at the now bustling depot, where new buildings rose beyond the tracks and the old saloon had been converted into a general store. But no one noticed the woman in the second car until she stepped down onto the platform. She wore a slate gray coat with polished buttons and a wide-brimmed hat pinned neatly to her braided hair. The wind caught her scarf, white silk with fine embroidery. But it wasn't her clothes that drew stares. It was the weight she carried, a black leather doctor's bag, and the confidence of someone who'd earned the right to carry it. Naomi Ellington Gray, M.D., had come home. Silas wasn't at the station. He hadn't known what train she'd take. But he knew the weight of her footfalls better than anyone. He was standing at the clinic window, reviewing notes on a mining accident, when he looked up, then froze. She stood in the snow, facing the clinic. No smile, no wave, just watching. He dropped the papers and crossed the room in 3 strides. When he opened the door, their eyes met. Quiet, steady, brimming. Then Naomi smiled. "Still limping, I see." Silas stepped forward, his coat flaring in the wind. "And you still know how to make an entrance." He stopped just in front of her. She looked up at him, heart pounding like it had the day he'd first offered her shelter. "You came back," he said, softer now. "I promised I would." He stared at her for a long moment. "You look different." She held up the bag. "Maybe it's the initials." He reached for the brass plate on the side. "Dr. Naomi E. Gray." "I like the sound of that." "So do I." The clinic hadn't changed much. A few new cabinets, fresh paint, same creaky front step, same smell of pine soap and antiseptic. But there were framed letters on the wall now. Thank you notes from patients, a photo of the blacksmith's boy with his mended leg, a newspaper clipping about her Chicago graduation. Didn't think anyone would care, she murmured. They cared, Silas said. More than you know. The townsfolk had kept the clinic running. The young doctor from Denver, Evans, had stayed longer than expected. Patients still filled the benches daily. The ledger was thicker than ever. But it's not the same, Silas admitted. Naomi looked at him. Because you weren't here. The town meeting was already in session when they arrived. Mayor Hollis glanced up as they stepped into the hall. Conversation dipped, then surged again in murmurs. Naomi removed her gloves, letting the silence do its work. The mayor cleared his throat. Miss, Dr. Gray, welcome back. Some men still didn't meet her gaze. Others tipped hats in awkward silence. But when the blacksmith stood, a ripple moved through the crowd. She delivered my grandchild, he said simply. You want to question her place here? You'll do it with me in the room. Naomi didn't speak. She didn't need to. Later that week, the clinic's new sign was installed. Pine Hollow Clinic. Doctors Gray and Gray. I didn't ask for that, Naomi said, brows raised. Silas shrugged. Didn't think you'd mind. I don't, she smiled. But the order matters. He winked. It does. That evening, a line of patients formed that stretched to the corner. Some had waited 2 years for her return. A rancher's wife with difficult pregnancies. A miner's boy with an old leg wound. An elderly black woman from a nearby homestead who'd heard whispers about a lady doctor who'd made the impossible possible. They came for her care, but they stayed because of how she looked them in the eye and said, I believe you. You matter. We'll figure this out together. One night, as they sat on the porch of the clinic, Naomi wrapped in a blanket, Silas sipping tea with whiskey, he finally asked the question. Was it everything you hoped? Chicago? She thought for a long time. It was harder than I imagined, and better. He waited. Some professors refused to speak to me. One tried to fail me twice. But there were others. Men who saw past skin. Women who fought beside me. I learned what I needed to. But I never forgot here. Silas nodded. And now? Naomi leaned against his shoulder. Now I build what I didn't have. A practice. A legacy. A place where someone like me doesn't need to explain why she belongs. Silas didn't speak, but his hand found hers in the quiet and didn't let go. By the summer of 1880, Pine Hollow wasn't the same town Naomi had first staggered into, freezing and humiliated. The streets were busier now, wagon ruts deeper, shop windows cleaner. A schoolhouse had been built at the edge of town. The general store carried proper linens, fresh fruit on lucky days, and medical supplies ordered from Chicago. But more than that, the people had changed. Not all of them. Not entirely. There were still those who crossed to the other side of the street when Naomi passed. Still whispers when she sat with Silas at the diner. But most of Pine Hollow had come to accept that their survival, quite literally, often rested in the capable hands of a black female doctor and a half-native Civil War veteran. And no one could deny that the clinic had become more than a place for stitches and laudanum. It was a beacon, a symbol of resilience, of second chances, of what happened when people refused to burn. Naomi's reputation had spread beyond town lines. Families from 4 counties away arrived seeking her care. Settlers with complicated pregnancies, ranchers with lingering injuries. Even a former Union general, half-blind and bitter, had come on the recommendation of a Denver colleague. She doesn't flinch, he had written, even when the patient does. Women especially sought her out. Those who had never had a doctor looked them in the eye as an equal, let alone ask them how they felt before examining them. Your clinic, the general's daughter had said one morning, is the only place I've ever felt safe enough to ask questions. Naomi never forgot that. The burned front desk had been replaced long ago, but Naomi had saved a single piece of it, the blackened wood carved faintly with the initials N.E. It sat framed behind her desk, a reminder, not of the fire, but of what survived it. In August, a small group of school teachers arrived from St. Louis, funded by a women's education initiative Naomi had written to personally. They set up a reading room in the church basement and a school for girls behind the general store. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Naomi stood beside the mayor and the preacher, her hand firm on the scissors. This town once told me I didn't belong, she said. Now it tells girls like me they can read. That's what I call progress. There was applause, genuine, thunderous. Even the mayor looked misty-eyed. Silas, standing in the crowd, didn't clap. He just smiled. The soft kind. The kind that spoke of pride too big for words. That fall, they adopted a child. Her name was Ada, barely 4, a black girl left orphaned after a winter fever took her mother and younger brother. Naomi found her asleep on a bench outside the clinic one morning, wrapped in a coat too big and clutching a Bible too small. Silas had carried her inside without a word. They hadn't planned to raise a child, but life had other plans. Ada became the heart of the home, quick to laugh, curious about everything. Within weeks, she called Naomi Mama and Silas Pa. "She reminds me of you," Silas said one night, watching Ada stack blocks while humming to herself. Naomi glanced over. "How so?" "Doesn't ask permission to take up space." On the anniversary of the fire, the town hosted a gathering, part harvest festival, part unspoken apology. They'd strung lanterns along the boardwalks and lit candles in the windows of every shop. At dusk, the mayor took the stage and asked Naomi to speak. She hesitated at first, then stepped forward. She didn't read from notes. She didn't soften her voice. Instead, she looked out at the people who had once turned her away, then slowly, painfully, come to stand with her. "There was a time," she said, "when this town wanted to bury me in shame. I was unwanted, unwelcomed, uninvited." She paused. "But I stayed, and I worked, and I proved that dignity doesn't need permission, that a woman's place isn't given. It's made, hammered out with grit and grace, and a whole lot of stubborn love." She looked at Ada, asleep in Silas's arms. "And now, when my daughter asks me where she's from, I can say this. You are from a place that tried to burn your mother down, and she built it back, better." Silence. Then applause that wouldn't stop. That night, Naomi stood on the porch of the clinic. The air smelled of firewood and hay and distant rain. Silas joined her, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "You were brilliant," he said. "You sound surprised." "Not at all." He kissed her temple. "Just grateful I get to witness it." She smiled, leaning into him. Behind them, the clinic's oil lamp burned low, illuminating a new plaque Silas had mounted beside the door. "The Ellington Gray Clinic, for all who come in need." As the stars came out and Ada's soft breathing carried through the window, Naomi looked out across the town that had once spit her out. It was quiet now, peaceful, but she knew there would be more battles ahead. For her daughter, for others who looked like her, talk like her, heal like her. Still, she wasn't afraid, because she learned something in the flames. When the world tries to bury you, you don't just rise. You plant roots, you build, and you turn that ash into something that lasts. They tried to break her spirit. They tried to burn her down, but she stayed. She built, and she turned rejection into a legacy. Now I want to hear from you. What part of Naomi's story touched your heart the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of strength, second chances, and Wild West women who refuse to disappear.